sponsored by Angelarium. Hello my beautiful watchers, and welcome to Lost in Adaptation, the review show dedicated to discussing how effectively film adaptations of books tie into their source material. Nellie Harper Lee of Alabama, USA only wrote one novel in her lifetime, but it was a doozy. To Kill a Mockingbird, published in 1960, took the literary world by storm, earning Lee almost immediate worldwide fame, the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the National Medal of Arts. By the 1980s, it had become one of the most frequently taught novels in US high schools. It tells the story of Jean Louise Scout Finch, a 6-year-old living in the American South in the 1930s Depression era, with her brother Jem and her lawyer father Atticus. Atticus is generally considered to be the de facto main character, but the book is told exclusively from Scout's perspective. Considering the setting and the fact that Lee's father was also a respected small-town lawyer, it's probably safe to say there was a certain amount of self-insertion going on here. However, I can't go into much more detail about this particular author because after the book's overwhelming success, Lee largely withdrew from public life, avoiding interviews and any other kind of publicity for almost the rest of her life. Less than 2 years after the book's release, Universal Studios published the adaptation rights. Robert Mulligan was tapped as director, and Halton Foote was brought on to tackle the daunting task of converting America's newest, most beloved book into a screenplay. Gregory Peck was cast as Atticus Finch after James Stewart declined the role, fearing the film would be too controversial. To Kill a Mockingbird would become a defining moment in Peck's already pretty impressive film career. He was joined by Mary Badham and Philip Alford, playing the story's narrator Scout Finch and her brother Jeremy. Like the book before it, the film received an overwhelmingly positive reception from critics and audiences, racking up 3 Academy Awards, including Best Actor. It was even selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry for being culturally and historically significant. So, both versions of To Kill a Mockingbird were successful, but was that because they were alike, or because they played into their own strengths? Let's talk adaptation. Okay, the following is either like for like taken from the book or close enough considering the change of medium. Atticus, being a middle-aged widower, doing his best to be a stoic but loving single dad to his 2 children, Jem and Scout, while working as a small-town lawyer in Alabama sometime in the 1930s Depression era. His kind-heartedness being exemplified early on by him accepting things like firewood or hickory nuts as payment from local families who don't have the funds to pay him for his legal services, like the destitute but proud Cunninghams. His unusual parenting style is also highlighted by him allowing his children to call him by his first name, implying a relationship that, while still quite strict at times, has a higher element of equality than your usual parent-child dynamic. Jem and Scout meeting Dill, a lively young boy visiting for the summer from Marillion, Mississippi, and explaining to him their fascination with their neighbor's house, as there's allegedly a mentally unwell recluse there called Boo Radley, who's been held prisoner inside by his jerk father for years. The local judge appointing Atticus to defend an innocent black man named Tom Robinson, who's been accused of sexual assault by the daughter of a notoriously unpleasant local family. The judge having chosen Atticus in particular because he was the only lawyer in the area willing to genuinely give his all to defending a black person, a moral rigidity that infuriates the local racists, the accuser's father, Mr. Yule, in particular. The kid sneaking onto the Radley property at night but getting spooked, Jem abandoning his pants to the wire fence and getting shot at when he went back to retrieve them. The title being dropped when Atticus talks to his children about his own father teaching him to shoot guns when he was about their age, and warning him that it's a sin to kill a mockingbird, as they're apparently more fundamentally innocent than other birds. Atticus, believed to be a bit of an old wuss by his children, being outed as secretly being the best shot in the state when he's called upon to put down a rabies-infected dog from a safe distance. Jem being confused but happy to find various gifts in the nook of his neighbor's tree, including a pocket watch and Warhammer minis made to look like him and his sister. But old man Radley putting a stop to this by filling in the hole with concrete for sus reasons. Atticus being true to his word during the trial and doing his absolute best to defend his client, drawing attention to the girl's injuries being inflicted by a left-handed person, then proving his client's left arm is disabled, but her abusive father just happens to be a southpaw. Peck's Oscar-winning scene uses a lot of dialogue from the book as Atticus implores the jury not to be racist arseholes and convict this super obviously innocent person, but them finding him guilty anyway. The black community appreciating Atticus trying, but him taking the loss pretty hard. Doubly so when he learns that his client was gunned down while supposedly attempting escape right before he could submit an appeal. Atticus breaking the news to Tom's family personally. Mr. Yule spitting in Atticus's face but failing to bait him into doing anything violent. Yule attempting to get revenge on Atticus for making him look stupid on the stand by trying to murder his children on the way back from a Halloween school pageant, but being thwarted by the unexpected intervention of the surprisingly real Boo Radley, who kills him with his own knife. And Scout being delighted to be alive and finally meet her mystery neighbor friend in person. You get one final example of how insanely rigid Atticus' belief in the letter of the law is right at the end, when he, for some reason, assumes that it was his 13-year-old son Jem who killed his attacker, and is immediately determined to go through all of the proper legal channels and have it deemed self-defense by an open court. So the local sheriff has to be like, nah dude, it was very clearly the other adult involved who did the stabbing, except no it wasn't, because being dragged through the courts would be terrible for him, even if he's found innocent, so Yule fell on his own knife. No, shut the fuck up, Atticus, he fell on his own knife. The decision to fudge the law to protect a guy who did something heroic and not avenge the death of a racist attempted child murderer is given the moral high ground by Scout comparing the idea of punishing Boo to killing a mockingbird. Before moving on, I just want to give an extra special thank you to my existing patrons for making doing YouTube for a living possible, especially but not limited to the big three, beloved Selfine, Shelby Holtz and Gelly Elfson, with an additional huge thank you to April Mack for their years of loyal support. I super appreciate all of you. If you were to ask someone what this film is about, chances are damn good you'd get some variation of it's a courtroom drama where a small-town lawyer back in super racist times defends an innocent black man from phony assault charges. And I'm not saying that the book isn't about that, it most certainly is, but what I cannot possibly overstate is just how much the book is not just about that. It's really about several years in the life of Jean Louise Scout Finch, the trial of Tom Robinson being one of several significant events that take place in that time. All of the plot points and new developments that related to the trial in the film were surrounded by chapters worth of more mundane slice-of-life events. Scout's first day at school was described in detail. There's a whole thing with Dill running away from home and staying with them for a while. Heck, the Halloween pageant that Scout was roped into playing a ham in plays out in its entirety over several pages. There's also a ton of extra stuff involving their proxy relationship with Boo Radley. They invent a whole role-playing game around his legend that offended Atticus with its poor taste, and at one point they try to smuggle a message into his house using a fishing rod through the window. Atticus has several siblings that come and go throughout the book with their eccentricities and prejudices. Their neighbor's house burns down, their family servant Calpurnia takes the kids to a black church, and they witness her tone shift between her talking to white folks voice and the dialect that she uses when bantering with her black friends and family. Even the old lady who yells at Scout at the start of the film has her own sub-arc. She hurls racist insults about Atticus at Jem until he loses it and destroys her flower beds, so Atticus forces him and Scout to read to her every night for a few weeks. The twist is, Atticus knew that she was dying and had decided to detox from all of her medication before she went. The children's reading to her was a distraction while she sweated it out and went into various pain comas. It's a third of the way into the book before there's any mention of Tom Robinson and Atticus defending him, and it remains a fairly background issue for Scout for another 7 or so chapters, only relevant to her because of the increasing criticism of her father that she and her brother have to endure from the townsfolk. So, yeah, the book is far from being a courtroom drama. It's way more about Scout becoming aware of the wider world around her as she grows up. She has to grapple with the idea of bigotry, the nuances of people's behavior when they've been living in abstract poverty for years, and morality itself. So, what the film took from the book is very accurate to it, but taking so little of it definitely changes the nature of the story as a whole. The film is less rigid about following other characters around. The book was super locked into Scout's 3.5-foot POV all the way through. Some events she didn't directly witness are relayed back to her post hoc, but for the most part it's all about what she saw and what she thought. If there's a scene in the film that she's not present and awake for, it's probably original to the film. Interestingly, this flexibility is used to make the connection that was formed between the kids and Boo Radley via the little gifts that he left them in the tree much more of a Jeremy exclusive thing. I'm not entirely sure what the point of that was, but there it is. You get a much clearer sense in the book of just how much casual racism the Finch kids were absorbing via cultural osmosis as their neighbours and extended family so confidently talked about the wrongness of Atticus's actions. It really highlights how important it is to not just set an example for kids, but to actively help them unlearn horrible things that others have taught them. The shooting of the rabid dog scene is my personal pick of interesting minor changes. The film didn't quite capture the dramatics of it. Book Atticus's spectacles symbolically shattered when he dropped them on the road, then he brought the gun to his shoulder and fired it in one super fast movement. Honestly, I was almost seeing it as an anime fight scene from the way that Lee was describing it. In a small plot twist, right after the trial it's revealed that Mr. Cunningham, who had literally attempted to lynch Tom earlier in the book, had been serving on the jury and had been so convinced by Atticus's argument he had fought pretty hard for a not guilty acquittal, proving that there is a small ray of hope that the racist population of the town could be won over someday. The movie sugarcoats Tom's death a little. It is possible that film Atticus is simply lying about it, but he says that the guards shot to wound him as he ran away and accidentally killed him. In the book, Tom took 17 bullets in the back while climbing a fence. 17, like it's as good as said that they lied about the escape attempt and murdered him. Of the three Finches, Jem was probably the most accurate to his book counterpart, going through all the irritable difficulties of a boy entering teenhood, but ultimately heroically protective of his sister, suffering multiple injuries, protecting her from Mr. Yule at the end. Scout is interesting. She's very accurate to the book in most ways. She talks and acts like a 6-year-old girl trying to understand new, complex, and sometimes dangerous situations. The only problem with this is Mary Badham was 10 when she performed the role, and she looks like she's 10. They cast an older actress but didn't adjust the character to match. I mean, it's not a huge deal, it was just a little weird at times seeing a 10-year-old act like a 6-year-old. And finally, the big man himself. Was Gregory Peck's portrayal of Atticus Finch loyal to the book? Let's talk about Go Set A Watchman. In 2015, a colossal 55 years after To Kill a Mockingbird, one of the most controversial sequels in history was published. Set 20 years after the events of the first book, an adult Scout Finch returns to her hometown after an extended stay in New York to discover that her father, her moral compass, her hero, is actually just as racist as the rest of their hick town now, and might always have been. A now 70-something Atticus Finch is actively taking part in organizations attempting to legally oppose desegregation, and low-key involved in a white supremacist movement. And fuck me sideways if he's not the kind of horrific racist who thinks he's just being rational about it. He doesn't think that black people are ready to be a part of the white man's world, and sees desegregation as a states' right issue that the federal government shouldn't be involved in. The first book is recontextualized somewhat as the unreliable narrative of a 6-year-old girl who thought the world of her father and completely missed his flaws. Scout, who actually is a halfway decent person, is absolutely devastated to have her perception of her father as a bastion of morality shattered, and spends the rest of the book arguing with him and struggling with the decision to cut ties with him or try to accept him for the bigot he secretly was the entire time. The theme of the book is another aspect of coming of age, learning that your parents are flawed humans and there's no such thing as the idealized two-dimensional heroes we thought were out there in the world. Unsurprisingly, this plot twist was as catastrophically received by fans as it was the fictional grown-up Scout. Half a century of admiration for this character obliterated. Bear with me though, my beautiful watchers, because the plot is even thicker than you might think. The backstory behind Go Set A Watchman is convoluted as fuck and has given rise to some not entirely unjustified conspiracy theories. It starts in the 1950s, before To Kill a Mockingbird was written. Apparently, the first draft of what would eventually become the iconic novel was a combination of Mockingbird and Watchmen, going back and forth between the two time periods like Stephen King's It, with the harsh juxtaposition of the two different perceptions of Atticus being an integral part of the story. However, her potential publisher gave her notes that were basically to the effect of, only the young girl half of this draft is engaging, the adult side of things is heavy and unfocused, and suggested that she rewrite the book entirely from the 6-year-old Scout's perspective. Which is exactly what she did. Sometimes editor feedback can be helpful. It's important to note that Mockingbird was essentially rewritten from scratch. Lee didn't simply tear up half the manuscript and fill in the gaps. gaps. What was published was written to be a standalone story that takes place in a single time period. So flash forward 55 years to 2015. Harper Lee is 89 years old and she's in an assisted living facility because of a stroke that left her with impaired vision, hearing, and mobility. Close friends of hers insist that for decades she'd maintained that she never wanted there to be any sequels to Mockingbird, and she'd obviously had plenty of time to think about that, living what one can only assume was a life of leisure for half a century. During this time period, Harper Lee's older sister Alice had been representing her as her lawyer and primary caregiver, and was known to be fiercely protective of her little sis and her desire for a private life, and was really on it when it came to any hint of exploitation. So, people found it just a little bit sus that, right after Alice passed away at the impressive age of 103, Harper's new lawyer almost immediately discovered the thought-to-be long-lost original draft that was rejected in the 1950s in a family vault. The 89-year-old Harper Lee, who again is said to have told her friends that she was determined to keep Mockingbird a standalone book just 4 years prior, was allegedly delighted by this find and fully supported her publisher's editing and publishing the unused half of the manuscript in the form of a sequel. Some people found it so sus, the Alabama Department of Human Resources launched an elder abuse investigation. However, their ultimate finding was that Harper Lee was mentally competent enough to make these decisions. After that, there was, very sadly, no time for further debate on this because Harper Lee died a year later. So, there's multiple schools of thought here. You can accept Go Set A Watchman and try to find whatever value you can in the message about learning to accept people for who they truly are, not what you want them to be. That Atticus might not be the hero we thought he was, but Scout still has the opportunity to be. Or you can straight up reject it, call bullshit on all the public statements, and maintain that Harper Lee never intended to publish this rough draft. Write the entire thing off as an amoral money-making scheme that took advantage of an old lady. And there's more middle ground options. You could theorize that Lee originally intended to write Watchmen, but chose not to go down that path after all, possibly because of the book's reception and what Atticus Finch came to symbolize. You could perhaps claim that Lee rewriting Mockingbird from scratch over several years after the draft's rejection is proof that she changed her mind about who Atticus was supposed to be. If Watchmen is canonical at all, it's canonical to a different universe, a different Atticus that was never intended to be the older version of the man that we read about in To Kill a Mockingbird. I have my own opinions on this. In fact, so many of them, I realized this already long tangent was becoming unjustifiable. So I did what all good YouTubers do and cut it out for a Patreon exclusive bonus video. So if you think you'd enjoy watching me fall down the conspiracy rabbit hole, be sure to check that out. A tiny $2 pledge gets you access to that and hours of exclusive videos. Anyways, the reason I've held you hostage for this little history lesson, my beautiful watchers, is depending on which school of thought appeals to you, wildly changes if Gregory Peck's Atticus is an accurate portrayal of the character. Because the film subtly but recognizably elevates Atticus from being a halfway decent man fighting a losing battle in a broken system into an American moral icon.
Our courts are the great levelers. In our courts, all men are created equal. In the name of God, do your duty. In the name of God, believe.
They gave Peck an Oscar for giving this anti-racist speech with his whole chest. The film really does play Atticus up as a civil rights champion, defending Tom because of a moral code to defend the downtrodden, not just because it was his job to do so. An anti-racist hero in a time when being one could ruin your career and put your very life at risk. The book version of him was just... it was a little more complicated. How much of his determination to defend Tom came from compassion for him, and how much was based on professional pride in doing his job no matter what, is a little blurry. Scout certainly believes he's a hero, but Atticus himself never claims any progressive motivations outside of the courtroom. He does talk about having to live with himself, but it's not clear if he's talking about racial equality or a harsh adherence to the law. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, his fall from grace in Go Set A Watchman was upsetting for fans of the book, but it was devastating for fans of the adaptation. I mean, the American Film Institute named the Peck version of Atticus Finch the greatest movie hero of the 20th century, for goodness sake. Which, finally, Finally, brings me to my point. If you discount Watchmen, then the film's version of Atticus is reasonably accurate to the original. It plays up one aspect of his character a little harder than others, but within reason. This is a legitimate interpretation of the man from Harper Lee's novel. But if you believe Watchmen is a legitimate sequel, or that its technically predating Mockingbird's existence proves that Atticus was always written to be a racist and we just missed it, then Gregory Peck was playing a wildly different person. He was a fundamentally bigoted man who happened to prioritize his iron-hard sense of duty to his profession over his prejudices, who got rewritten into a liberal paragon of humanity. If this is true, it means the film is undercutting Lee's themes regarding coming of age, inevitably having to involve accepting the difference between childlike idealism versus reality, the importance of killing your conscience's father, finding your own moral compass, and accepting the hard lesson that it is entirely possible for someone to be wonderfully good in some ways and absolutely terrible in others. This is of course not a criticism of the filmmakers' choices. They could not have been expected to see 55 years into the future if Harper Lee chose not to disclose her eventual plans for Atticus to them. I'm just rambling about the ultimate results when you take an overview. So yeah, it's kind of a reader's choice situation. Hero or complex asshole, accurate if incomplete portrayal, or polar opposite. I guess let me know in the comments where your heart falls. Final thoughts. This film is considered a civil rights touchstone, and the novel is just less focused, covering a much broader spectrum of possibly equally poignant stories, themes, and messages. I guess you could say that the film is loyal to the most significant part of the story, but not loyal to the book. They cropped so much stuff out of the photo, it kind of changed what the photo represented. But, I mean, it's not like we need less civil rights touchstones. The issues highlighted by the film about the racial bias of the court system were still upsettingly relevant in the 1960s, and still shockingly relevant today. Had I been alive and involved at the time, I might also have chosen not to risk diluting the portrayal of these issues by forcing more of the book's plot into the film. It is wild that no one knew that Atticus Finch was existing as the Schrodinger's cat of book accuracy for over half a century, retroactively revealed, if you accept Watchmen, to have been completely transformed on the path between pages and screen. But that, my beautiful watchers, is a very big if. I want to end on mentioning that during one of the last interviews that Harper Lee gave before dropping a smoke bomb and vanishing for 55 years, she was allegedly very happy with how the film turned out, praising it for capturing the spirit of her book. She remained friends with several of the cast and crew, especially Peck, for the rest of their lives, so I don't know, call me a conspiracy theorist, but I don't think that's something she would have done if Peck had so wildly misunderstood the assignment. I'm just saying. Well, after all that semi-controversial book discussion, I'm happy to be able to give you guys some good book-related news. Namely, I'm finally being sponsored by one. It only took 10 years, but better late than never. 2 books, actually. The Book of Emanations and the Book of Watchers, the Angelarium books. And let me tell you, my beautiful watchers, these bad boys are fascinating. For one thing, they represent the most ambitious art project that I've seen in a long time. Did you know that there are thousands of named angels across all of human religions, legends, and mythology? There's angels of nature, the zodiac, concepts, constellations. Well, I didn't, but artist Peter Morbacher evidently discovered this and set out to create an art book that visualizes as many of them as possible using unique and creative art styles. What makes it especially interesting is it's not only encyclopedic, but story-driven. You know how Dante used the narrative of traveling through hell and heaven to describe them? Well, it's kind of like that, but less obviously tied to any particular religion, and featuring Smikiel, the Angel of Vengeance. What happened to your head, Smikiel? You can also learn about, and apologies, you guys know I'm not great at pronouncing things at the best of times, Matriel, the Angel of Rain, Bizaliel, Angel of Shadow, Binach, the Emanation of Knowledge, and Satriel, Angel of Deception, who, as you can see, is big into vaping right now. The artwork in these books is truly wonderful, and the story that ties it all together makes the reading experience really unique. If this interests you, you can use discount code NOBLE20 for 20% off all items in the store, including one or both books and other merch. Link in the video description.